Section 8 of Messengers of Evil by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 8. End of the Ball. When Sonia Danidoff entered Thomery's ballroom, she made a sensation. It was not far off midnight when she appeared in all her brilliant beauty and dazzling array, leaning on the arm of her host and fiancé, who bore his honours proudly. Dancers paused to admire this handsome couple. Then the Hungarian band redoubled their efforts, and the whirling, eddying waltz started afresh, more gay, more inspiriting than before. In a corner opposite the musicians, a group of persons were in animated talk, among them Sonia Danidoff, Thomery, and Jérôme Fandor. The music was their theme. Some admired Wagner and the classics, others voted for the moderns, for the sugariest of waltzes, for the romantic, the bizarre. "For the profane like myself," declared Thomery, laughing, "gypsy music has its charms." "Oh," cried Sonia Danidoff, "you are not going to tell me that such hackneyed things as the Smile of Spring and the Blush Rose Waltz are to your taste?" Her tone was reproachful, but her smile was charming. Nanteuil, the fashionable banker, who was fluttering about the Princess, hastened to take her side. "Come now, Thomery, you would not put your signature to that?" Jérôme Fandor, who had just joined the group, declared: "For my part, I thoroughly agree with you, my dear Monsieur Thomery." Sonia Danidoff looked her surprise. Thomery replied, with a touch of malice: "Monsieur Fandor is like myself: the Tinquenoy is more to his taste." "More than Wagner's operatic big guns," finished Fandor. Then, turning to the Princess, who still wore her air of surprise: "Yes, Princess, I confess it, my taste in music is deplorable. It comes from absolute ignorance. I do not understand these modern symphonies. The simple romantic suits me best." "And that is?" queried Nanteuil. "Just some music hall air or ditty," answered Fandor, with a smile as frank as his confession. The Princess was amused at this little pseudo-artistic discussion. She was about to speak, when a couple of waltzers broke into the group and scattered it. Jérôme Fandor slipped away and wandered through the gorgeous reception rooms. Here and there, when caught up in the throng and forced to halt, or when pressed against the wall of the ballroom, scraps of conversation, mingled with the strains of the Hungarian band, fell on his retentive ears. He took refuge at last in the embrasure of a window, but his retreat was soon invaded by two young men who, he gathered, had run across each other in the gallery, and were continuing their talk about old times and new. "Come, tell me, dear Charlie, what has been happening to you since we left the school?" "Bah! I go from the Madeleine to the Opera nearly every evening, and then back again. I go to bed late and get up late. I go out a good deal, as you see. Sometimes I dance, but very rarely. I often play bridge, and that is about all. It's not very interesting. But you, old boy, I heard you had got a jolly good billet, my dear Andral." "Oh, hardly that, dear fellow, but I am well on the way to one, I fancy. I had the good luck to be introduced to Thomery, and it so happened he was wanting a young engineer for one of his sugar plantations in San Domingo." "Good Lord, at San Domingo, among the niggers?" "That's right. Not so bad, though it and the boulevards are a few miles apart; but on the other hand, I am interested in my work, and I am married to a charming woman, Spanish." "Won't you introduce me to your wife?" "When we are nearer to her, old fellow. I came to Paris by myself to talk big business with Thomery. I am only here for a fortnight. Now do point out some of the celebrities. You know everybody." Charlie adjusted his eyeglasses and looked about the room. "Ah, there's an interesting pair, that old fellow and the young one, who are so extraordinarily alike, the Barbey Nanteuils, bankers for generations in the financial swim, and mixed up in all sorts of big affairs, sugar among them. Look here, that's the widow of an ironmaster, Allouat. She is passing close to the orchestra, not bad looking, in spite of her mahogany-coloured hair, granddaughter of a famous French peer, Flavonia de Saint-Ange. Ah, I breathe again. It's a detail, but I am quite delighted. General de Rigny's daughters have at last found partners. They are ugly, poor things, and they've dressed themselves in rose pink as though they were schoolgirls. A fine name, a distinguished position, but no fortune, and no husband. Ah, now there's someone who looks as if he were in luck, and he is, too, matrimonial luck. The affair is settled this evening, it's whispered. It will interest you particularly, for the lucky fellow is none other than Thomery." "What, Thomery?" "Yes, Thomery. Although he is well over 50, he means to commit matrimony. I quite envy him his future wife, my Andral. There she is, that stately dame who is going toward the last of the reception rooms all alone, rather haughty, but a noble creature. It's Princess Sonia Danidoff, related to the Tsar in some distant way, and with an immense fortune. Just look, dear boy, at those splendid jewels on that beautiful neck of hers. They say she's got on 700,000 francs worth, and the rest to match. Millions to swell the sugar refiner's pouch. She is to lead the cotillion with him, so there's no doubt about the betrothal. By the by, you are going to stay for the cotillion?" "But you must. You simply must. We must sit together at supper. We have still so much to say. Besides, if you hurry off like that, I fancy Thomery won't be best pleased. Oh, I say, there he is, coming our way. There's no denying it, he is a fine figure of a man, though he is in the 50s. But do look! What is the matter with him? He looks as if he had seen a ghost." Sonia Danidoff, who had been waltzing with Thomery, was a little out of breath. A quick glance in a mirror showed the lovely princess that her cheeks were rather flushed. "I am scarlet," she thought, with that touch of feminine exaggeration characteristic of her. She was a true daughter of Eve. At that exact moment she felt a slight tug at the bottom of her skirt, and at the same time a black coat was making profuse apologies. It was Monsieur Nanteuil.
"I'm in despair, Princess," cried the banker, "but no one is quite responsible for his movements in such a crash. I am very much afraid that I have stepped on the muslin of your ravishing toilette and have slightly torn it."
The princess protested that it did not matter in the least, and the banker moved away, bowing low and pouring out apologies and regrets. As soon as he had left her, the princess showed her annoyance. How could she lead the cotillion with this tear in her dress, slight though it might be, and the cotillion would begin in less than half an hour? Then she remembered that her fiancé had led her, on her arrival, to a little drawing room, quite away from the reception rooms at the end of the gallery, that she might leave her cloak there, saying: "Dear Princess, I have prepared this boudoir for you, and you only." Sonia decided to retire to this boudoir at once, and repair the damage to her dress. As she passed the cloak room on her way, a maid offered her services. The princess refused them. If she could not have Nadine, she preferred to manage for herself. Besides, she saw that 2 pins concealed in the silk muslin would put her dress to rights, and a touch of powder to her cheeks would bring her colour down to a becoming tint. She was considerably amused at the veritable arsenal of flasks and boxes of perfumes which Thomery, as became an attentive lover, had placed there in her honour. The little boudoir had been transformed into a comfortable lady's dressing room. Everything was provided, down to a glass of sugar and water, down to a little phial of alcohol and mint. Sonia opened a powder box; then, like all the women of her race, having a passion for perfumes, she took up a scent sprayer and lavishly sprinkled her throat and the lower part of her face with what was labelled "Essence of Violets." The princess may have suffered from the intense heat of the ballroom, and required rest without realising it, for she felt slightly faint, a little sick, almost a desire to sleep. She slipped down on to a low divan which occupied a corner of the room. She drew deep breaths, breathing in the perfume, a sweet, rather strange scent from the sprayer. "This scent is sickly," she thought. "If only I had some eau de cologne!" Without rising, for she felt a real lassitude stealing over her, she looked round for the eau de cologne she wanted. Thomery's arsenal did not contain any. There was only one sprayer, and that Sonia Danidoff held in her hand. She sprinkled herself a second time, hoping that the perfume would revive her; but, on the contrary, her fatigue increased. Her eyes closed for a moment. When she opened them again, the room was in darkness. Sonia tried to rise from the divan. An overpowering torpor, though not disagreeable, was benumbing her whole body, and before her eyes bright lights seemed to float, succeeded by thick darkness. Her head turned round and round. She strove to cry out, but her voice stuck in her throat. Her body jerked with a feeble, convulsive movement. She heard indistinctly an unknown voice murmuring: "Let yourself go. Sleep. Have no fear." Sonia Danidoff essayed a momentary resistance. Then she succumbed and lost all consciousness of her surroundings. Absolute silence reigned in the boudoir Thomery had reserved for the sole use of his beautiful betrothed when he arrived to lead her to the cotillion. He found the door shut. He knocked discreetly. There was no reply. Repeated knocking evoked no audible answer. Thomery opened the door. The room was in total darkness. He switched on the electric light. The boudoir was brilliantly illuminated. The sight that met his startled eyes was so moving that he grew livid with horror and rushed to the side of his betrothed. Sonia Danidoff was extended on the divan, motionless and pale as death. A hoarse and laboured breath came from her heaving bosom at irregular intervals. On the exquisite skin of neck and breast were spattered streaks of blood. Beside himself, Thomery rushed away in search of help. It was at this terrible crisis that the fiancé of Sonia Danidoff had attracted the attention of Charlie, whose friend, the young engineer Andral, was the protégé of the man whose awful pallor and distracted air spelt tragedy. Thomery, his countenance ravaged by intense emotion, his hands clenched, shaken by nervous tremors, hastened with unsteady steps in the direction of the gallery leading to the ante-room. Suddenly a woman's shrieks broke in on the charming harmonies of a slow waltz, which the orchestra was rendering at the moment. There was an irresistible rush toward the boudoir, where two half-fainting women had collapsed on chairs, and the famous surgeon, Dr. Marvier, was doing his utmost to prevent the crowd from entering the room. The word went round that a tragedy had taken place, a death. Princess Sonia Danidoff was in the room lying dead. The words crime and murder were freely bandied about. Murmurs of assassin, robber, assassination could be heard. Some 20 of the guests who had entered the boudoir could give details. The dreadful rumours were true. Sonia Danidoff, they declared, was stretched out on the floor covered with blood, her breast bare, her pearls had vanished, a horrible sight. The uproar died down. An icy silence reigned. The dancers drew together in groups, discussing the terrifying tragedy. Several women were still in a fainting condition. Pallid men were opening windows that fresh air might circulate in the overheated rooms. On all sides they were watching for the return of their host. Thomery remained invisible. General de Rigny called his 2 daughters to his side and spoke words of affectionate encouragement, for they were much upset. The old soldier marched off with them in the direction of the grand staircase and toward the cloakroom on the landing. As he was preparing to take over his coat and hat, one of the footmen went up to him and said a few words in a low voice. "What? cried the General. "What's the meaning of this? Not to leave the house? But I am under suspicion, then? It is shameful! I never heard such a thing!" A butler approached the irate General and said, very respectfully: "I beg of you, General, to speak lower. A definite order to that effect was given to us 10 minutes ago. Directly Monsieur Thomery was aware of the accident, he had the entrance doors closed, and had the house surrounded by the detectives who were downstairs on duty. The sergeant is there to see this order carried out. You cannot leave the premises. It is not that you are under suspicion, General, of course not. But perhaps in this way they may succeed in finding the guilty person, who has certainly not left the house, for no one has gone from the house for at least an hour." General Rigny had calmed down. He understood why his host had issued the order. He retired to a corner of the gallery with his daughters, Yvonne and Martha. The poor things seemed stunned. The reception rooms slowly emptied. The guests crowded onto the veranda and into the smoking room. There was a buzz of talk, queries, comments, conjectures. It ceased abruptly. Monsieur Thomery had just appeared at the top of the grand staircase, accompanied by a gentleman whose simple black coat was in striking contrast to the light dresses and brilliant uniforms of the guests. Someone whispered: "Monsieur Havard." It was, in fact, the chief of the detective police force. Within a couple of minutes of his frightful discovery, Thomery had rushed to the telephone and had called up police headquarters. It was a piece of unexpected good fortune to find Monsieur Havard there at so advanced an hour. He had immediately responded to the call in person. Whilst crossing the reception rooms, Thomery talked to him in a low voice. "Accept my grateful thanks, monsieur, for having answered my appeal for help so quickly. No sooner did I discover the body of my princess than I lost no time in having all the exits from the premises watched. Unfortunately, I was obliged to leave my reception rooms for quite a quarter of an hour, so that I cannot tell you what happened there. If only I had been able to remain with my guests, I might possibly have surprised some movement, some gesture, some look, which would have put me on the track of this murderous thief. Unfortunately..." Monsieur Havard interrupted, smiling. "That does not matter, monsieur. If the guilty person is among your guests, and has in some way betrayed himself, I shall hear of it. There are at least 4 or 5 plain-clothes men among the dancers, I can assure you of that." "I can assure you to the contrary," replied Thomery. "I know my guests, know who have been admitted here." "I also am sure of what I say," insisted Monsieur Havard. "There is scarcely a ball, a reception, however select it may be, where you will not find a certain number of our men." Thomery made no reply to this. They had arrived at the door of the fatal room. The doctor was standing beside the victim. Dr. Marvier reassured Monsieur Havard. He announced that the princess had been almost literally felled to the ground by a most powerful soporific, and was in no real danger. She would certainly regain consciousness in the course of an hour or two, but she must be kept perfectly quiet. That was absolutely necessary. Monsieur Havard did not question the doctor's statement. After a rapid glance, he was able to form his own opinion. There had been no struggle. The victim's wounds were due to the haste with which the thief had torn the jewels from Sonia Danidoff's neck. He next considered the 2 windows which, with the door opening onto the gallery, were the only means of entrance and exit the room had. There were strong iron shutters behind the windows. These could not be very easily opened. In any case, it was impossible to close them again from the outside. The thief must have been in the house, probably in the ballroom, and had followed the princess into this little retiring room. But what had been the princess's motive for coming here alone? Monsieur Havard had learned that the room had not been thrown open to the other guests. Then he perceived that the lace at the bottom of her dress was undone. He bent down and examined it carefully. 2 pins, hastily stuck in, kept together a piece of this lace. The conclusion Monsieur Havard came to was that the princess, having a rent in her dress, had wished to be alone for a minute or two in order to repair the damage, and that while she was stooping toward the bottom of her skirt, the assassin had thrown her to the ground and despoiled her of her jewels. The chief of the detective force turned to Thomery abruptly. "I shall be obliged to follow a course of action which may rather annoy your guests, but they must excuse me. Everything leads me to think that the guilty person is on the premises, since no one has gone away. I must hold an investigation at once. I am going to cross-examine your guests, probe them thoroughly, and I wish to put them through their paces in your office, Monsieur Thomery, one by one. I will begin with you, so that your guests may take my questioning with a good grace. It is only a mere matter of form, a pure formality." The investigations were lengthy and trying, and led to no result whatever. Fandor, who was preoccupied by this fresh drama in which he had taken some part, far too slight to please him, was putting on his overcoat when he stopped dead. A voice, an unrecognisable voice, had murmured in his ear: "Attention, Fandor, it is serious." Our journalist turned round in a flash. Ah, this time he would find out who the mysterious unknown was, the unknown who wished to influence by word written and word spoken the course of these investigations he had taken in hand. Anonymous friend? Concealed adversary? He must at all costs clear up the mystery. A dozen people were crowding round Fandor, insisting on being attended to in the cloak room. No one noticed the journalist. No one seemed interested in what he was doing. Fandor examined every one of Thomery's guests who were standing about him. He knew some of them by name, some he knew by sight. He searched their faces with penetrating eyes, but in vain. Some were commonplace looking, others calm, others impenetrable. "Hang it all!" he grumbled. He went off furious and upset. End of Chapter 8. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California, shaggybark.blogspot.com. Messengers of Evil by Marcel, Allain, and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 9. Fingerprints. After having interrogated all the witnesses of last night's tragedy he could get in touch with, Jérôme Fandor returned to the Palais de Justice. "All the same," he confessed to himself, "I must admit that up to the present I do not know anything very definite about it. This Princess Sonia Danidoff has managed to get robbed in a most extraordinary way. At 1 o'clock in the morning, Havard declares that the thief can be none other than one of the guests, and thereupon every person present has to submit to being searched, an exhaustive search. Nothing comes of it. Then Bertillon arrives on the scene, and it seems he has obtained very distinct imprints of finger marks. If they are as distinct as all that, the task of the police will be simplified. But, on the other hand, is it likely the guilty person will be so simple as to respond to the summons issued by the public prosecutor, a general summons issued to all Thomery's guests to parade in Bertillon's office for the finger mark test? Not he. Why, the moment he heard of it, he would make for the train and pass the frontier. When his cab arrived at the Palais, Fandor uttered a big sigh of satisfaction. "There are a good many things I am not clear about. Let us hope Bertillon will give me some information." The entrance to the anthropometric department was under the discreet observation of two detectives. "Oh," thought Fandor, "they think it probable there will be an immediate arrest, do they? We are going to have some complications, I foresee, in connection with the finger mark ceremony." He sent in his card, and a few minutes after he found himself in the presence of Monsieur Bertillon. "Well, what is it you want me to tell you?" asked this famous man of science. "Why, dear master, everything that took place last night. Is it true that you have summoned here all Thomery's guests? Have you obtained such perfect reprints that in your hasty examination you can be certain of identifying them with those of the persons who will pass through your office to undergo the test?" Bertillon smiled. "Oh, my dear fellow, you are of those who do not put much faith in the results of my tests for police purposes. That, let me tell you, is because you are not acquainted with our procedure. The impressions I obtained are distinct, precise as can be. If an arrest is to be made before long, it will be made on sure grounds." Fandor bowed. "I accept your statement, dear master, but do be kind enough to tell me what happened after my departure." "Oh, nothing very extraordinary. Of course, you know about the affair, how Princess Sonia Danidoff was discovered?" "What I know is that Thomery found one of his guests, Princess Sonia Danidoff, in a dead faint in a small drawing room; that Dr. Dumarvier declared she had been rendered unconscious; that the theft of a pearl necklace worn by the victim had been the motive of this criminal attempt; that Monsieur Havard, called in at once, first made sure that no one had left the house, and then had everyone on the premises searched. And that is really all I know about it." "Well, Havard did not find anything." "No one was caught with compromising jewels in their possession. The last guest gone, the house searched from top to bottom, not a single pearl had been found. I arrived just when the investigations had terminated, at the moment when they were about to take the Princess home. She had regained consciousness by this time, and declared she knew nothing except that she had fallen asleep after using a perfume sprayer. This has been seized, and chloroform has been found in it, but no one seems to know who filled the sprayer with this stupefying perfume. Did Monsieur Havard send for you?" "Yes, he telephoned. You know, of course, that I am always asked to intervene now in any ticklish affair. Well, Dr. Dumarvier, an expert in his way, noticed that the Princess had been half strangled by the thief in his haste to secure the pearl collar, and he wished me to search for fingerprints on the nape of the victim's neck,
to discover the assassin's signature, in fact." "And there were some?" "A quantity. The Princess had been slightly wounded in the nape of the neck. Blood had been pressed onto the skin of her neck, and it was easy to take a cast of one of the fingers." "Was that sufficient?" "Yes and no. Such an impression is something, but there is better than that. The thief must have given the neck a violent squeeze with his hands, consequently there is a complete impression of the hand. That I had to get." Fandor instinctively put his hand to his neck as if he were squeezing it. He said: "Are such impressions imperceptible?" "Yes, to the eye, but not to the photographing apparatus. It is thoroughly established that the pattern formed by the innumerable lines which furrow the fleshy part of our fingers is as peculiarly characteristic of each individual as the form of his nose, of his ears, or the colour of his eyes. The curves or rings, the various forms taken by these lines already exist in the newly born and never change to the day of his death. Even in case of a burn, the skin grows again, the ridges reappear exactly as they were before the accident. Look you, one can obtain by this method, this test, such results as you would never dream of. For example, by taking these imprints I obtained in the early hours of today, as a basis, I can tell you with almost absolute accuracy the height of the individual." "This is marvellous!" cried Fandor. "The service your department renders, then, is to abolish legal blunders?" "That is so. Every individual identified is identified plainly, irrefutably. Unfortunately, we cannot always obtain perfect imprints on the spot where the crime is committed." "But this night?" "Ah, as I told you, the impressions were most satisfactory. I have the thief's hand, the whole of it. I will even go so far as to declare that the fellow who committed the crime has already been through my hands. I recognise that hand. You shall see whether or no I have made a mistake." Bertillon pressed a bell, and asked the official who answered it: "Have you identified the imprints I sent you just now?" "Yes, sir. This man has already been measured here. It is register 9200. Bertillon turned to Fandor. "You see, I was not mistaken. All I have to do is turn up my alphabetical index, and for this very month, for the number is a recent one, and I shall know the name of the old offender. He must be one, as he is catalogued here. Who has committed this assault?" Whilst speaking, Monsieur Bertillon was turning over the leaves of an enormous register. "Ah, here is the 9200 series." Suddenly the book slipped from his hands, and he exclaimed: "The guilty man is..." "Is who?" questioned Fandor. "Is Jacques Dollon. The hand that has robbed Princess Sonia Danidoff is the hand of Jacques Dollon." "But it is impossible." Bertillon shrugged his shoulders. "Impossible? Why, since the proof is there." "But Jacques Dollon is dead." "He was the thief of yesterday's crime." "You are making a mistake." "I am not making a mistake. Jacques Dollon is the thief, I tell you." This was too much for Jérôme Fandor. He could not contain himself. "And I tell you, Monsieur Bertillon, that I know that I am certain, positively certain, that Jacques Dollon is dead. Now then!" The man of science shook his head. "I, in my turn, say you are making a mistake. Look at the imprints I have here, that of Jacques Dollon taken a few days ago, and this made from the impressions obtained this very night, or, to be exact, in the early morning hours of to day. They are identical. One can be exactly superimposed on the other." "Coincidence." "There is no such coincidence possible. Besides," Monsieur Bertillon took up a powerful magnifying glass, "look at these characteristic details. Just look at the lines of the thumb, all out of shape. The presentment of the thumb itself is not normal either. It denotes habitual movement in a certain direction. It is the thumb of a painter, of a potter. Oh, it is all as clear as daylight. Believe me, there is no doubt about it. Jacques Dollon is the guilty person." "But," repeated Fandor obstinately, "Jacques Dollon is dead. I swear to you, he is dead." This assertion made no impression on the man of science. "As to whether Jacques Dollon is alive or dead, that is for the police to decide. For my part, I can declare that the man who committed the theft yesterday evening is the identical man who passed through my hands some days ago, and that man is certainly Jacques Dollon." Jérôme Fandor left Monsieur Bertillon. The young journalist was perplexed. If the finger prints on the neck of Princess Sonia Danidoff were, beyond dispute, those of Jacques Dollon, then the mystery surrounding this affair, and not this affair only, but a series of incidents, so far from being cleared up, was more impenetrable than ever. But Fandor was obsessed by the idea of Fantômas in the depths of mystery, presiding over this series of dramatic occurrences. "Yes, Fantômas is certainly in this," he cried. "But Dollon has left traces of himself here, as it were put his signature, his identification mark to this crime. But Dollon is not Fantômas. Besides, Dollon is dead. I have proofs of it. Yes, he is dead. Well, then, what to make of it?" Fandor could not make anything of it. End of chapter 9. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California, shaggybark.blogspot.com.
Of Messengers of Evil by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 10. Identity of a Navvy. "The Barbey Nanteuil Bank is certainly gorgeous," thought Jérôme Fandor as he traversed the hall on the ground floor, where the massive mahogany furniture, the thick carpets, the deep comfortable chairs, the sober elegance of the window curtains breathed an atmosphere of luxury and good taste. "And decidedly banking is the best of businesses," added our young journalist. An attendant advanced to meet him. "What do you want, monsieur?" "Will you take in my card to Monsieur Nanteuil? I shall be glad to have a few minutes' talk with him." The attendant bowed. "On a personal matter, monsieur?" "A personal matter? Yes." Jérôme Fandor wanted to interview the Barbey Nanteuils on the subject of the recent occurrences which had roused Paris opinion to the highest degree, mysterious occurrences on which no light seemed to have been thrown so far. Not only were the Barbey Nanteuils the bankers of the Baroness de Vibray, but they had been present at Thomery's ball when the attack on Princess Sonia Danidoff had taken place. Would they allow themselves to be interviewed? Fandor decided that they certainly would, for they were business men, and was he not going to give them a free advertisement? The attendant, a stately individual, returned. "Monsieur Nanteuil is sorry he cannot see you. He is taking the chair at an important committee meeting. But Monsieur Barbey will see you for a few minutes. That is to say, if he will do instead of Monsieur Nanteuil." "In that case, I will see Monsieur Barbey," said Fandor, rising. Following the attendant, Fandor traversed the whole length of the bank, and passing the half-open door of Monsieur Nanteuil's office, the name on the door told him this, he noticed that it was empty. Monsieur Barbey received him coldly and with a solemn bow. Fandor's reply was a pleasant smile. "I know," said he, "that your time is precious, Monsieur Barbey, so I will come straight to the object of my call. You must be aware of the profound impression caused by the double crimes recently committed on the persons of Madame de Vibray and the Princess Sonia Danidoff?"
"It is true, monsieur, that I have followed in the papers the account of the investigations regarding them. But in what way?"
"Does it concern you?" finished Fandor. "Good heavens, monsieur, is it not a fact that the Baroness de Vibray was your client? And were you not present at Monsieur Thomery's ball?"
"That is so, monsieur, but if you are hoping that I can supply you with further details than those already published, you will be disappointed. I myself have learned a good deal about these crimes only from reading your articles, monsieur."
"Can you confirm the statement that Madame de Vibray was ruined?"
"I do not think I am betraying a professional secret if I say that Madame de Vibray had had very heavy losses quite recently."
"And Princess Sonia Danidoff?"
"I do not think she is one of our clients."
"You do not think so?"
"But, monsieur, you cannot suppose that we know all our clients. Our business is a very extensive one, and neither Nanteuil nor I could possibly know the names of all those who do business with us."
"You know the name of Jacques Dollon?"
"Yes, I knew young Dollon. He was introduced to me by Madame de Vibray, who asked me to give him a helping hand, and I willingly did so. I can only regret that my confidence was so ill placed."
"Do you believe him guilty, then? Not really?"
"I certainly do. So do all your readers, monsieur. Is that not so?"
But whilst Monsieur Barbey was regarding Fandor with some astonishment because of his half avowal that he himself was not sure of Dollon's guilt, the door was flung open with violence, and Monsieur Nanteuil, out of breath, looking thoroughly upset, rushed into the room, followed by 5 or 6 men unknown to Jérôme Fandor, and showing traces of fatigue and emotion also.
"Good heavens, what is it?" cried Monsieur Barbey, rising to meet his partner.
"The matter is," cried Monsieur Nanteuil, "that an abominable robbery has just been committed."
"Where?"
"Rue du Quatre Septembre." Still panting, he began to give details. Fandor did not wait to hear more. He rushed from the Barbey Nanteuil bank and made for the Place de l'Opéra at top speed. In consequence of the extraordinary occurrence which Monsieur Nanteuil had hastened to report to his partner, a considerable crowd had flocked to the scene of the accident. But barriers had been quickly erected, and the crowd, directed by the police, were able to circulate in orderly fashion when Fandor arrived on the scene. The agile young journalist had made his way to the front row of the curious, and was bent on entering the stone and wood yards of the works forbidden to the public. The usual palisade no longer existed, owing to the landslip. Just as he was searching in his pocket for the precious identification card which the police grant to the reporters connected with the big newspapers, Fandor was jostled by an individual coming out of the yards. It was a navvy, all covered with mortar, white dust and mud. He was without a hat, and held his right hand pressed against his cheek. Between his fingers there filtered a few drops of blood. The glances of the man and the journalist met, and Fandor felt as though someone had struck him a blow in the heart. The navvy had given him so strange a look. Fandor thought he had read in his eyes a threat and an invitation. Whilst our journalist hesitated, troubled by this sudden encounter, the man moved off, forcing his way through the crowd. Then Fandor caught sight of some of his colleagues, stumbling about amidst the ruins and rubble in the stone yard. This reassured him. If he followed the navvy, and he had the strongest inclination to do so, he could telephone to some reporter friend who would supply him with the necessary details for his article on the accident. He had got some facts already. A sudden collapse of stones and mortar had buried a handcart, in which were large bars of gold belonging to the Barbey Nanteuil bank. But the precious vehicle had soon been rescued, and they were taking it to the bank under escort. Satisfied as to this, Fandor followed with his eyes this strange navvy who was going further and further away. Fandor had an intuition, a very strong feeling, that he must follow the trail of this man and make him talk. It was of the utmost importance. Something told him this was so. The navvy was not simply going away, he had the air of a man in flight. Fandor, who was following now and keenly observant, noticed the hesitating movements of the man. Then there was an astonishing move on the navvy's part. He hailed a taxi and got in. Fandor had the good luck to find another taxi at once. Jumping in, he said to the driver: "Follow the 4227 GH, which is in front of you. Don't let it outdistance you. You shall have a good tip." The chauffeur, a young alert fellow, understood there was a chase in question, and amused at the idea of pursuing a comrade through the crowded streets of Paris, he set off. He adroitly cut through a file of carriages and caught up with taxi 4227 GH. He then proceeded to follow closely in its track. Fandor, keen as a bloodhound on the scent, kept watch over their progress to an unknown destination. They rolled along the Avenue de l'Opéra. They cut across the Rue de Rivoli. Then, when they were going at a good pace through the Place du Carrousel, Fandor felt much moved by memories of past times, those days of great and wonderful adventures when he would follow this very route to keep some exciting appointment with his good friend Juve. How frequent those appointments used to be, when the famous detective was alive and so actively at work, the work of unearthing criminals, those pests of society. Off Fandor used to set when the longed-for summons came, and would meet Juve in his little flat on the left side of the Seine. Ah, those were times indeed! When a lad, Fandor had been practically adopted by the famous detective. Young Jérôme Fandor had served a kind of apprenticeship with Juve, and this had brought him in close touch with the ups and downs of a number of crime dramas. He and Juve together had even been the voluntary or involuntary heroes of some of them. Then the tragic disappearance of Juve had occurred, when Fandor had escaped death by a kind of miracle. After that dreadful date, our journalist had found himself alone, isolated, with not a soul to whom he cared to confide his perplexities, his anxieties, his hopes.
Fandor shuddered at the thought of this. The taxi had just crossed the bridge de Saint Pérez, had followed the quay for a few miles, then rounding the Fine Arts School, they entered the old and narrow rue Bonaparte. What was this? Of course it could only be a coincidence, but still, rue Bonaparte? Why, that only brought the memory of Juve more vividly to mind. For Juve had lived in this street, and now, a few yards further on, they would pass before the modest dwelling where, for years, the detective had made his home, keeping jealously hidden from all and sundry, this asylum, this secret retreat. Ah, what happy hours, what jolly times, what tragic moments, too, had Fandor not passed in that little flat on the 4th floor! How they had chatted away in the detective's comfortable study! Then Fandor, full of spirit, would come and go from room to room, unable to sit still, all fire and activity, and Juve would remain in one place, calm, full of thought, sometimes sunk in a reverie, often silent for hours at a time, his eyes obstinately fixed on the ceiling, smoking methodically, mechanically even, his eternal cigarette. Oh, those good, good days gone for ever! After the disastrous disappearance of Juve, Fandor had not gone near the rue Bonaparte for 6 months. It was all too painful. To find again the familiar rooms and no Juve, it was too painful. However, one fine day, he determined to go and see what had happened to his friend's old home. Alas, in Paris, the lapse of half a year suffices to alter the most familiar scene. In rue Bonaparte, the former house porters had left. Their place had been taken by a stout, sulky woman, who gave evasive replies to Fandor's questions. He extracted from her the information that the tenant of the 4th floor flat had died, that his furniture had been cleared out very soon after his death, and the flat had been let to an insurance inspector. Fandor was roused from this retrospect. He grew pale, his heart seemed to stop its beating. The taxi he was pursuing had slowed down, had drawn up beside the pavement, had stopped in front of Juve's old home. Fandor saw the navvy descend from the taxi, pay his fare, and enter the house, still keeping his right hand pressed to his cheek. Without a moment's reflection, Fandor leapt from his taxi, flung a 5-franc piece to his driver, and without waiting for the change, he rushed into the house, whose passages and stairs were so familiar. The navvy was swiftly mounting the stairs in front of our excited young journalist, who was close on his quarry's heels. The two men were panting as they went up that dark staircase. At the 4th floor, Fandor was nearly overcome by emotion, for the man entered Juve's old flat as if he had a right to do so. He was on the point of shutting the door in the face of his pursuer, but Fandor had foreseen this. He slipped through with a forceful push and caught the navvy by his jacket. Quick as lightning, the navvy turned, and the two men stood face to face. The result was startling. Speechless, they stared at each other for what seemed an interminable moment. Then, with a strangled cry, Fandor fell into the man's arms and was crushed in a strong embrace. Two cries escaped from their lips at the same moment. "Juve!" "Fandor!" When he came to himself again, Fandor found he was lying in one of the comfortable leather armchairs in Juve's study. His temples and the lobes of his ears were being bathed with some refreshing liquid. The commingled scent of ether and eau de cologne was in the air. When he opened his eyes, it was with difficulty that he could credit the sight that met them. Juve, his dear Juve, was bending over him, gazing at him tenderly, watching his return to consciousness with some anxiety. Fandor vainly strove to rise. He felt dazed. "Fandor!" murmured Juve, in a voice trembling with emotion. "Fandor, my little Fandor, my lad, my own dear lad!" Ah, yes, this was Juve, his own Juve, whom Fandor saw before him. He had aged a little, this dear Juve of his, had gone slightly grey at the temples. There were some fresh lines on his forehead, at the corners of his mouth too, but it was the Juve of old times for all that. Juve, alert, supple, robust, Juve in his full vigour, in the prime of life. Oh, a living, breathing, fatherly Juve, his respected master and most intimate friend, restored to him, after mourning the irreparable loss of him, and his incomprehensible disappearance. While Fandor slowly came to himself, Juve had lessened the disordered state of his appearance. He had taken off his workman's clothes, and also the red beard which he had worn when he ran up against the journalist in the Place de l'Opéra. As soon as Fandor was himself again, not only did he feel intense joy, a quite wild joy, but he also knew the good of a keen curiosity. Now he would know why the detective had felt obliged to disappear, officially at any rate, from Paris life for so long a period. Protestations of faithful attachment or unalterable affection poured from Fandor's excited lips, intermingled with questions. He wanted to know everything at once. Juve smiled in silence, and gazed most affectionately at his dear lad. At last he said: "I am not going to ask you for news, Fandor, for I have seen you repeatedly, and I know you are quite all right. Why, I do believe you have put on flesh a little." Juve was smiling that enigmatic smile of his. Fandor grew impatient, on fire with curiosity. Ah, this was indeed the Juve of bygone days: imperturbable, ironical, rather exasperating also. However, Juve took pity on Fandor, who was still under the influence of the shock he had received. "Well now, dear lad, did you recognise me a while ago?" Fandor pulled himself together. "To tell you the truth, Juve, I did not; but when our glances met, I had an intuition, a kind of interior revelation of what I had to do, and without any beating about the bush, I knew I had to follow you wherever you went." Juve nodded his approval. "Very good, dear fellow. Your reply gives me infinite pleasure, and on two counts. In the first place, I perceive that your remarkable instinct for getting on to the right scent, strengthened by my teaching, has improved immensely since we parted; and, in the second place, I am delighted to know that I made my head and face so unrecognisable that even my old familiar friend Fandor did not know me when we were brought face to face." "Why this disguise, Juve?" demanded Fandor, his countenance alight with curiosity. "How was it I came across you at the very spot where the Barbey Nanteuil load of gold had been submerged, for the moment, under bricks and mortar? And, with regard to that, Juve, how comes it?" Juve cut Fandor short. "Gently, Fandor, gently. You are putting the cart before the horse, old fellow. And if we continue to talk by fits and starts, never shall we come to the end of all we have to say to each other, and must say. Are you aware, Fandor, that we have been drawn into a succession of incomprehensible occurrences, a mysterious network of them? But I have good hopes that now we shall be able to work together again, and I like to think that if we follow the different trails we have each started on, we shall end up by..." It was Fandor's turn to interrupt. "Hang it all, Juve, I partly understand you, of course, but there's a lot I don't know yet. What are you after, dear Juve? Are you, as I am, on the track of Jacques Dollon?" There was a pause. Then Juve said: "I shall reserve the details for our leisure. What matters now is that I should make clear to you the principal lines my existence has followed during the past 3 years or so. A few minutes will suffice to put you in possession of the main facts. Now listen." The narrative went back to the time when Juve, aided by Fandor, was close on the heels of their mortal enemy, the mysterious and elusive Fantomas. The detective and the journalist had succeeded in cooping up the formidable bandit in a house at Neuilly, belonging to a great English lady, known under the name of Lady Beltham. This Englishwoman was the mistress and accomplice of the notorious Fantomas. (Footnote 9. See the exploits of Juve.) But at the precise moment when Juve was about to arrest him, a frightful explosion occurred, and the building, blown up by dynamite, collapsed in ruins, burying the two friends and some 15 policemen and detectives. Rescuers were on the spot in a very short time, and, uninterruptedly, for 48 hours they searched among the ruins for the victims of the disaster, dead or alive. By a miraculous piece of good fortune, Fandor had been but slightly hurt, and at the end of a few days he was as well as ever. But the poor fellow had lost his best friend, Juve. The search for Juve had been a useless one. Several corpses could not be identified owing to the injuries they had sustained, and as it seemed incredible that the detective could have escaped, they had concluded that one of the unrecognisable bodies must be his. Juve, however, was not one of the dead. Saved in as miraculous a fashion as Fandor had been, less injured even, a few seconds after the frightful crash, he had been able to rise and make his escape. The distracted detective had raced away from the scene of disaster in search of Fandor, and also in pursuit of Fantomas, for he believed that both had made their escape. After wandering about for some hours, he had returned to mingle with the crowd of rescuers, and had learned that Fandor had been found, and was not dangerously hurt. On the other hand, there were those present who declared that he, Juve, was killed. This unexpected announcement gave him an idea. For an indefinite period he would accept this version. For, more than ever set upon catching his enemy, the detective said to himself that if Fantômas could feel certain that Juve no longer existed, the pretended dead would have a far better chance of catching the living bandit. Thereupon Juve had submitted his project to his chief, Monsieur Havard, and the head of the police secret service had consented to ignore Juve's presence among the living. Juve knew that Lady Beltham had escaped to England. Supposing that Fantômas would rejoin her without delay, the detective left Paris, crossed the Channel. He then went to America, for scarcely had he arrived in London when he learned that the bandits had gone off to the United States. Juve travelled from place to place for some months. It was a vain quest. Fantômas had vanished, leaving not a trace behind, and the disgusted detective, now convinced that he had followed a false trail, returned to France. He determined to set himself to study anew the prison world. He was all the more interested in it because, before his supposed death, Juve had effected the arrest of several members of a band of which Fantômas was the leader. Among these were the Cooper, the Beard, and old Mother Toulouche. Then, at the prison connected with the asylum, Juve had come across a warder who, some years previous to this, had been the warder in charge of a man condemned to death, one Gurn, who had not been guillotined because a substituted person had been executed in his stead. Juve was convinced that the condemned criminal was none other than Fantômas. Juve strongly suspected that this warder, Nibet by name, knew a great deal about this old affair. But soon Nibet passed to the dépôt. The accomplices of Fantômas, having served the time of their respective sentences, some at Melun, others at Clermont, all this nice collection of criminals would meet once more on the pavements of Paris. Juve, therefore, had imperious reasons for mingling with this charming crowd. Fandor had followed Juve's rapid narrative with the most intense interest. "And then, Juve, what then?" insisted Fandor. "And then," said the detective, "to make an end of it, for we must not be for ever going over the past adventures, let me tell you that after many and diverse happenings, a band of smugglers and false coiners, among whom are to be found individuals already known to you, notably the Beard, the Cooper, and also that wretch of a Mother Toulouche, one fine day made the acquaintance of a poor sort of creature, simple-minded and anything but sharp-witted, an individual who goes by the name of Cranajour." "Cranajour?" queried Fandor. "I don't in the least understand." "Yes, Cranajour," repeated Juve. "Here is how it came about. You remember when Fantômas got an unfortunate actor named Valgrand executed in his stead? Well, our mysterious Fantômas, the better to mislead and bamboozle those who might suspect this atrocious jugglery, our bandit of genius, for Fantômas has genius, took the personality of Valgrand for several hours, and dared to go to the theatre where the real Valgrand was playing. However, as Fantômas was not capable of playing the part to a finish, he conceived the idea of making those about Valgrand believe that he had been suddenly afflicted with a loss of memory, and from that moment could not remember anything whatever. Fantômas, the false Valgrand, could thus pass for the true Valgrand, and be taken as such by the true Valgrand's intimates. I humbly confess, Fandor, that I copied Fantômas by creating Cranajour." Juve then rapidly explained to the journalist the origin of this nickname, and also told him how the bandits treated him as one of themselves; how, as soon as they were convinced that he could not remember anything he had seen or heard for 2 hours together, they talked freely before him of their plans and doings. The detective went on: "I must add, my dear Fandor, that no very sensational revelations have come to me so far through my intimacy with this set of criminals. It seemed to me I was in the midst of common thieves, who smuggled and circulated false coin. But one thing did puzzle me, puzzles me still. These folks succeed in selling a considerable number of pounds sterling, false coin, of course, and that without my being able to discover, so far, where they sell them, who makes their market. They also sell lace smuggled from Belgium. That, however, interests me but little, and I was prepared to leave to the lower ranks of the service the duty of clearing Paris of this commonplace brood of criminals. Already, indeed, the regular police had arrested one of the smugglers, the cooper, and two of his subordinate confederates. I was about to turn my back on this crew in order to give all my attention to a new trail which might put me on the track of Fantômas once more, when the Dollon affair blazed forth. And then, suddenly, I meet again my Fandor, braver than ever, more perspicacious also, adroitly taking the affair in hand, bravely thrusting himself into the breach.
Is there any connection between the Dollon affair and my band of smugglers?
You will appreciate the importance of this question and the reply to it in a minute, my Fandor, when you learn that the dépôt warder, Nibet, is one of the most valuable confederates of the coiners, of Mother Toulouche, of that hooligan, the Beard.
Is it possible? Cried Fandor. Ah, Juve, all this is so strange that I believe you are really on Fantômas' track once more.
Juve shook his head, then he continued. I have still a great deal to tell you, but I must pause a moment to say that I ought to apologize to you for a fairly brutal act I committed on your behalf, in your best interests, as you will see.
And to Fandor, who opened his eyes in astonishment, the detective related, in humorous fashion, the history of the famous kick he had administered, a kick wherewith Juve had removed his friend from the immediate and certain danger of assassination at the hand and by the knife of Nibet. Fandor could not get over it. He grasped Juve's hands and pressed them warmly. "My friend, my good friend," murmured he, moved almost to tears, "if I had had the least suspicion..."
Juve interrupted him. "There are many more things, Fandor, you never suspected, things you ought to know. And what is more, you seem to me to be neglecting your work badly at this very moment, Mr. Reporter. It is already 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and if they are counting on you to supply them with information about this affair of la Place de l'Opéra..."
Fandor leapt to his feet. "It's true," he cried. "I had quite forgotten it. But it is of no importance by the side of..."
Juve interrupted. "The affair is serious, Fandor. Attention! Do you remember? It is the formula I employed on 2 or 3 occasions, when warning you, after the assassination of Jacques Dollon, after the attack on Sonia Danidoff at Thomery's house."
"What? It was you, Juve?" cried Fandor.
"Yes, it was. But let us pass on. Time presses. I am going to disappear anew, but you now know where to find me, in future, and under what form should occasion require it. Cranajour I am. Cranajour I remain, for the time being, at any rate. As to you, Fandor, be off with you at once, and go and hatch out that article of yours."
Our journalist rose mechanically, but Juve, thinking better of it, caught him by the arm, drew him back, and pointed out the writing table.
"Come to think of it, you know nothing about the affair, and I do. There are things which should be said, above all things, to be hinted at. Do you wish me to give you information? Sit yourself there, my lad, I am going to dictate your article to you."
Our journalist, understanding the gravity of the situation, and well knowing that if Juve took this course he had important reasons for so doing, did not say one word. He simply brought out his fountain pen, screwed it ready for action, and with his hand resting on a pile of white paper, he waited. Juve dictated:
"First of all, put this as your title: An audacious theft. That does not tell the reader anything, but it awakens his curiosity. Let us continue. Write."
End of Chapter 10. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. shaggybark.blogspot.com. Messengers of Evil by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 11. An Audacious Theft. 2 hours after Juve had dictated his article to Fandor, our journalist was reading it in proof in the offices of La Capitale. His article ran thus: "By a fortunate coincidence, we found ourselves this very morning in the directorial office of the Barbey Nanteuil Bank, chatting with Monsieur Barbey himself, when Monsieur Nanteuil arrived, breathless, and announced to his partner that a sensational robbery had just been committed in the rue des Quatre Septembre, a robbery involving a sum of 20 millions, representing a clearance recently effected by the Federated Republic. It seems that at 10 o'clock this morning Monsieur Nanteuil accompanied the little handcart used for transferring the bullion and paper money to the station,
from whence it was to be dispatched. According to custom, 6 of the bank clerks and 3 plain clothes men went with Monsieur Nanteuil, but at the very moment when the hand cart passed out of the Place de l'Opéra and turned the corner of the rue du Quatre Septembre, that is to say, at the precise moment when it was passing the palisade surrounding the works on the Auteuil Opéra Metropolitan line, a formidable explosion was heard, and the hand cart, as well as the men who were drawing it and escorting it, including Monsieur Nanteuil himself, disappeared in a deep excavation caused by the explosion, whilst a water pipe which had burst at the same moment poured out torrents of water, flooding the surrounding pavement and roadway. It was then about 11 o'clock in the morning, and the rue du Quatre Septembre presented a very animated appearance. At the noise of the explosion, the passers-by were glued to the spot, dazed, stupefied. Then exclamations broke out on all sides. An accident! A bomb? The explosion had created a veritable chasm. The first moment of stupefaction past, Policeman 326 quickly organised the rescuers and sent notice to the nearest police station. Some minutes later, the firemen arrived on the scene armed with ladders and ropes. Meanwhile, the crowd of curious onlookers was increasing with amazing rapidity. Monsieur Nanteuil was the first to be drawn up from the pit. By a miracle he had escaped injury. Unfortunately, the clerks of the Barbey Nanteuil Bank had not got off so well. Bruises, contusions, cases of severe shock, more or less serious, had to be attended to by neighbouring chemists. Monsieur Nanteuil, reassured as to the fate of his clerks, turned his attention to the handcart and its millions of bullion, and the police in charge were given to understand that it must be drawn up without delay. Into the pit the firemen once more descended. At first they were surprised not to find the handcart and its millions. No doubt it had been covered by the mass of fallen bricks and mortar, but Fireman Le Goffic, who had advanced some yards along the railway line, caught sight of it. The cart was lying upside down, but except for a few scratches, it was found to be unbroken. It was immediately hauled up to the roadway. Monsieur Nanteuil at once ascertained that the seals were intact. He then gave orders that it was to be taken back to the Barbey Nanteuil Bank without delay. As the train which was to have borne away the bullion had left the station hours ago, Monsieur Nanteuil decided to break the seals and place the bullion in one of the bank's safes for the night. Monsieur Nanteuil's stupefaction can be imagined when, having unsealed and opened the handcart, he realised that the sacks of gold had been replaced by sacks of lead. It was at this moment that Monsieur Barbey was informed of the fact by his half-frantic partner. We were witnesses of this dramatic scene. Every second was of value. Instant action was the thing. Police headquarters was warned at once, and but a few minutes had elapsed when Monsieur Havard arrived in a taxicab to take charge of the investigations. Thanks to the courtesy of Monsieur Havard, we were allowed to accompany him to the stone yards of the Metropolitan. The police were convinced that it was hereabouts that the robbery had been accomplished. We reached the spot about an hour after the explosion. The first investigations produced no result, but Monsieur Havard pursued his solitary search up one of the sidings, and had his reward. His exclamation was heard, and we hastened to the spot. He had just found a second handcart, in all points similar to that he had recently examined in the courtyard of the Barbey Nanteuil Bank. Monsieur Havard at once realised that he had before his eyes the original handcart, and that the handcart he had seen in the bank courtyard was a clever substitute. It need scarcely be said that there is no trace of the stolen millions to be found in the original handcart, cast away in a siding of the Metropolitan. Our readers know something of the appearance presented by these lines in course of construction on the Metropolitan Railway. We have repeatedly published in La Capitale details regarding the way in which the engineers and workmen supervise and execute the cutting of the passageway on the Underground. The operations in the Place de l'Opéra are on an enormous scale, for there is a junction here, and the soil is more undermined than elsewhere on the railway. At the precise spot where the explosion occurred, there are 4 galleries in course of construction. One is the future Auteuil Opéra line. The others either lead to existing lines or are galleries made for the convenience of the workmen. Handcart number 1, that is to say, the substituted handcart filled with sacks of lead, was found in the passageway of the Auteuil Opera line, which is perfectly accessible and would naturally be visited by rescuers. The original handcart was hidden away in one of the lateral galleries, which are small and narrow, and not likely to be visited and examined, except as a last resource. It is therefore clear that the affair has been carefully arranged, a premeditated robbery. The presence of the 2 handcarts would establish this. The handcarts used by the bank for the transport of bullion and other forms of money are of a particular make, unique in fact. Their respective positions show that the robbers had carefully prepared their drama, and it was skilfully arranged. Thanks to Monsieur Havard's kindness, we were permitted to approach the original handcart. It was in a lamentable condition. The body of it was nearly smashed to pieces. Of course, no traces of the seals were to be found. The only remark we see fit to make in this connection is, that Monsieur Nanteuil, his clerks, and those who witnessed the accident must have been greatly excited and upset, otherwise they would naturally have been much astonished at finding the substituted handcart practically uninjured after an accident of so crushing a nature. We have carefully examined the soil round the original handcart, in the hope of finding some clear footprints of the thieves, or their accomplices. But it was impossible to draw any conclusion from this examination. The footmarks are intermingled, superimposed, undistinguishable. It must be admitted the soil of the Metropolitan hereabouts has been very much trampled over and beaten down, so that it is difficult to believe that researches, with the object of discovering the robbers' footmarks, are likely to have any clear result. At the moment these lines have been written, the investigation in the Metropolitan passageways still continues, and will, in all probability, be continued late into the night. So far the police admit that results are meagre. Monsieur Havard considers it certain that the deed is a premeditated one, carefully prepared, and that, consequently, the explosion which caused the catastrophe was a deliberate act of violence. On the other hand, Monsieur Nanteuil declares that outside the parties interested, that is to say, the Barbey Nanteuil Bank and the Comptoir des Comptes, who were to receive the bullion, not a soul could know of the transfer on that particular morning. But the staffs of the bank and of the Comptoir National des Comptes are absolutely trustworthy. Their honour has never been questioned. It is evident that such a daring and desperate deed, carried through so successfully in the galleries of the Metropolitan, in the sight of all Paris, at 11 o'clock in the morning, could only be the work of a band of criminals, numerous and perfectly organised. Are we returning to the days of Fantomas? Let us add that, owing to the number of individuals probably involved and the daring nature of the crime, Monsieur Havard considers that it will be extremely difficult for the guilty persons to escape from the police. Jérôme Fandor had just finished correcting this sensational article, when slips from the Havas agency arrived at La Capitale. Our journalist cast his eyes over them, thinking he might find some piece of news that had come to hand at the last minute. As he read, he grew pale. He struck his writing table a violent blow with his fist. "For all that, I am not mad!" he cried; and holding his head between his hands, spelling out each word, he re-read the following telegram from the Havas agency: "Affair of the Rue du Quatre Septembre. At the last moment of going to press, a bloody imprint has been discovered on handcart number 2. Monsieur Bertillon immediately identified this imprint. It was made by the hand of Jacques Dollon, the criminal who is already wanted by the police for the murder of the Baroness de Vibray, and the robbery committed on Princess Sonia Danidoff." "But I am not mad!" cried Fandor, when he had read these lines. "I declare I am not mad! By all that's holy, Jacques Dollon is dead! 50 persons have seen him dead! But for all that, Bertillon cannot be mistaken." After a minute or two, Fandor took up his pen again and added a note to his article, entitled "Sensational Development. The police say it is the late Jacques Dollon who has stolen the millions." This note showed clearly that Jérôme Fandor did not believe that Jacques Dollon could possibly be involved in this affair, or in either of the other crimes in connection with which his name had been mentioned. Chapter 12. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. shaggybark.blogspot.com. Of Messengers of Evil by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 12. Investigations. A man jumped quickly out of the Auteuil Madeleine tram. It would have been difficult to guess his age or see his face. He wore a large, soft hat, a Brazilian sombrero, whose edges he had turned down. The collar of his overcoat was turned up, so that the lower part of his face was so far buried in it that his features were almost hidden. Then, during the entire journey, seated at the end of the tram-car, he had kept his back turned on the other passenger. He seemed to be absorbed in watching the movements of the driver. At the end of the rue Mozart, where the rues La Fontaine, Poisson, de Perchamps meet, he had quitted the tram with real satisfaction. Then, in the silence of the evening, the clock of Auteuil church had slowly struck 8 silvery strokes. The listening man murmured: "Oh, there's no hurry after all. I've a good 2 hours' wait in front of me." Leaving the frequented ways, he plunged into the little by-streets, newly made and not yet named, which join the end of the rue Mozart with the boulevard Montmorency. He walked fast, at the same time taking his bearings. "Rue Raffet. If I don't deceive myself, it lies in this direction." He reached the hilly and lonely road bearing that name, which, on both sides of its entire length, is bordered by attractive private residences. Swiftly, silently, stealthily, this individual approached one of these houses. He glanced through the garden railing, scrutinizing the windows, which were lighted up. "Good, good, decidedly good," he said in a low tone of satisfaction. "But there's 2 hours to wait. They are still in the dining room, if I am to go by the lighted windows." The watcher now inspected the rue Raffet. The house which interested him so much was situated just where the rue du Docteur Blanche opens into the street at right angles. Auteuil is certainly not a frequented part, but, as a rule, the rue Raffet is generally more lonely than any of the streets in Auteuil. No carriages, no pedestrians. From an early hour in the evening that hilly road was, more often than not, quite deserted. So was the rue du Docteur Blanche, still surrounded by wasteland, and more especially at the rue Raffet end. A glance or two sufficed to show the man the lie of the land. He noted the feeble glimmer of the street lamps. He made certain that not one of the neighbouring houses could perceive his actions, mark his movements. He repeated in a theatrical tone of voice, with a note of amusement in it: "Not a soul, not a solitary soul. Well, it is no joke to wait here, but after all it is a quiet spot, and I can count on not being disturbed in the job I have in hand tonight." This individual traversed the rue Raffet, gained the rue du Docteur Blanche, and, wrapping himself up in his voluminous black coat, ensconced himself in a break in the palisades bordering the pavement. He stood there motionless. Anyone might have passed within a few yards of him without suspecting his presence, so still was he, so imperceptibly did his dark figure blend with the blackness of the night. He started slightly. The church clock struck 9, its notes sounding silvery clear through the tranquil night. In the distance some convent clock chimed an evening prayer. Then a deeper silence fell on the darkness of night. Suddenly the front door of the house, which the stranger had watched with scrutinizing intentness, was thrown wide open, showing a large luminous square in the darkness. 2 women were speaking. "Are you going out, my darling?" asked the elder. "Don't be anxious, madam," replied a girlish voice. "There is no need to wait for me. I am only going to the post." "Why not give Jules your letter?" "No, I prefer to post it myself." "You would not like someone to go with you? There are not many people about at this hour." The same fresh young voice replied: "Oh, I am not frightened. Besides, it's only rue Raffet, which is deserted. As soon as I reach rue Mozart, there will be nothing more to fear." The luminous square drawn on the obscurity of the garden disappeared. The mysterious stranger, who had not lost a word of this conversation, heard the door of the vestibule close, then the gravel of the garden crunch under the feet of the girl coming down the path. Very soon the gate of the garden grated on its badly oiled hinges, then the elegant outline of a young girl was visible on the badly lighted pavement. She was walking fast. The stranger remained stationary until the girl had gone some way, then pressing against the wall, concealing his movements with practised ability, he followed her at a discreet distance. "There can be no doubt about it," he murmured. "I recognised her voice directly. It's the very deuce. It's going to complicate matters. A lovers' meeting? Not likely. She must be going to the post, as she said. She will return in about a quarter of an hour, and then... The girl was far from suspecting that she was being followed. She had walked down rue Mozart, turned into rue Poussin, posted her letter, and then walked quietly back to the house. The stranger had not followed her into the more frequented streets. He awaited her return in a dark and deserted side street. When she came into view again, he sighed a sigh of great satisfaction. "Ah, there is the dear child. That's all right. Now we shall have some fun. Or rather, I shall." Anyone seeing his face whilst making these significant exclamations would have been frightened by his sneering chuckle, his hideous grin. A few minutes later, the girl re-entered the little garden of the house in the rue Raffet. A stout woman opened to her ring. "Ah, there you are, darling." There was relief in her tone. "Yes, here I am, safe and sound, madam." "Nothing unpleasant? No one molested you, Elizabeth?" Elizabeth Dollon, for she it was, shook her head and smiled a smile both sad and sweet. "Ah, no, madam. I was sure you would be waiting for me. I am so sorry." "No, not at all. Tell me, Elizabeth, Jules has told me that you would not be going out to-morrow. The poor fellow is so stupid that I ask myself if he has not made a mistake." "No," said Elizabeth, "it is quite true. I do not think I shall go out, either in the morning or the afternoon." "You expect a caller?" "It is possible someone may come to see me. If by any chance I have to go out for a few minutes to get something or other, I must warn Jules. He must make the visitor wait. I shall not go far in case..." "All right, that's settled then, darling. Now good night. I am going to my room." "Good evening, madam, and good night." Leaving stout and kindly Madame Bourrat, owner of this private boarding house where Elizabeth Dollon had found a refuge, the poor girl, still with a smile on her pale lips, made her way upstairs, entered her bedroom, and carefully locked the door. She lit the lamp. Her face now wore a tragic look. Its expression was wild and desperate. "If only he would come!" she sighed. "Ah, I am afraid! I am afraid! I am terribly afraid!" Elizabeth stood motionless, a frozen image of fear. All but her eyes, they were casting terrified glances about her. And no wonder! Elizabeth was neatness personified, and her room was kept with exquisite care. But now everything was in the greatest disorder. The drawers of her chest of drawers were piled one on top of the other in a corner of the room. Their contents were thrown down in heaps a little way off. Books had been cast pell-mell on a sofa. A great wicker trunk, wherein Elizabeth had packed numerous papers belonging to her brother, was overturned on the floor, the lid open. Its contents were scattered near, a confused mass of documents and crumpled papers. Elizabeth stared about her for a long minute, and again she cried: "Oh, if only he would come! What is the meaning of all this?" She regained her self-control. Her usual expression of serene gravity returned. "To go to sleep," she murmured. "That is the best thing. To-morrow will come more quickly, so... And, oh, I am so sleepy, so very, very tired." Soon Elizabeth blew out her lamp. Darkness reigned in her room. It was about 10:30, and the light in Elizabeth Dollon's room had been extinguished for some little while, when the front door of the little house was opened again. Noiselessly, with infinite precautions, with searching and suspicious glances, taking care to keep off the gravel of the paths, tiptoeing on the grass edging the flower beds, where his steps made no sound, a man left the house and went toward the garden gate. He quickly reached it, and there he commenced to whistle a soft, slow, monotonous, and continuous whistle. Second succeeded second. Then another whistle, identical in rhythm, replied. Soon a voice asked, "Is it you, Jules?" "It is I, master." The man whom Jules called master was the stranger, who for 2 weary hours had kept strict watch over the goings and comings of the house. "All well, Jules?" "All well, master." "And nothing new?" "I don't know about that, master. She has written a letter." "To whom?" "I couldn't say. I could not see the address, master."
"You red-headed idiot!"
The servant protested.
"No, it was not my fault. She did not write in the drawing room, but in her own room. I couldn't get a squint at her paper."
"Did she not say anything?"
"Nothing."
"Did she look upset?"
"A little."
"No one suspects anything?"
"I hope not, master. Gods and little fishes, if anyone suspected."
The visitor's voice grew harsh, imperious.
"Enough!" said he. "We have no time to lose."
"How no time?"
"That's it. We must set to work."
"Work? Now? This very night? Oh, master, surely not."
"Don't I? Do you imagine that I arranged a meeting only for the pleasure of talking to you? Come on now. March."
"What are we to do?"
A moment's silence.
"I cannot see the house very well because of the branches. Listen, look. Isn't there a light? Someone still up?"
"No, they've all gone to bed."
"Good. And she?"
"She too."
"You did what I told you?"
"Yes, master."
"You were able to pour out the narcotic?"
"Yes, master."
"And then?"
"What do you mean by then?"
"Have you carried out all my orders? The last?"
"Yes, it is all right. I went into her room and blew out the lamp."
"Good. Now for it."
A slight brushing sound along the low stone wall of the garden was barely perceptible to a listening ear. The wall was topped by railings, and the gate had sheets of iron fastened to it. In a twinkling the stranger leaped down beside Jules.
"It is child's play to vault that gate," he said.
By the uncertain light of the stars, Jules could see the individual who had just joined him. His appearance was fantastic, and the wretched Jules started and trembled in every limb. The stranger who had thus invaded Madame Bourrat's domain, who had a short while before been wearing a long cloak and immense sombrero, wore them no longer. Probably he had rid himself of them by casting them among the bramble bushes on the waste ground around rue Docteur Blanche. Now he was clad in a long black knitted garment moulded tightly to his figure, a sinister garment, by means of which the wearer can blend with the darkness so as to be almost indistinguishable. His face was entirely concealed by a long black hood, a movable mask, which prevented his features being seen. Through 2 slits gleamed 2 eyeballs. They might have burned a way through like glowing coals.
"Master, master," murmured Jules, "what are you going to do now?"
This spectral figure replied in a low tone.
"Fool, go on in front. Or no, better follow me. And not a sound. It's as much as your skin is worth. Take care, great care."
The 2 men advanced in silence, but while Jules seemed to take exaggerated precautions to prevent being heard, his companion seemed naturally shod with silence. He advanced noiselessly, almost invisible in his black garment. The 2 accomplices were soon at the front door steps of the house.
"Open!"
commanded the master. Jules slipped the key into the lock. Noiselessly the door turned on its hinges.
"Listen,"
whispered the cloaked man.
"Halfway up the stairs you must stop. I do not wish you to go right up."
"But—"
"Do as I say. You must keep watch. If by chance you should hear a noise, if I were to be taken by surprise, you must go downstairs, making a great noise and shouting at the top of your voice, 'Stop him! Stop him!' Thus, in the first moment of confusion, everyone will rush after you, and that will give me the time to choose my way of escape."
Jules, whatever his fears, did not dare to question his instructions.
"Very good, master," he breathed. "I'll do as you say."
"I should think you would," scoffed his master, almost inaudibly.
Leaving his accomplice on the stairs, the masked man went forward. He seemed to know the ins and outs of the house, for he turned into the corridor, and, without a moment's hesitation, walked towards the door of Elizabeth Dollon's room. He put his ear against it. "She sleeps," he murmured. He had inserted a key in the lock. There was an obstacle to its easy entrance. "Confound it! The girl has left her own key in the lock," he said softly. "What the deuce am I to do now? What did Jules do when he got in and put out the lamp? Why, of course, he took off the screw that fixes the staple. A simple push will suffice." With a push of his shoulder, the door yielded. The stranger entered and carefully closed the door. He walked to the window and drew the curtains, muttering: "That fool should have thought of this just now." Taking a small electric torch from his pocket, he turned on the light. Calmly, collectedly, he approached a couch at one side of the room. On it lay Elizabeth Dollon in a deep sleep. She looked white as death. "An excellent narcotic," he muttered, bending over the unconscious girl. "When one thinks that she took it at dinner, then went out, and that then it produced its effect." Moving away from Elizabeth, he crossed the room to where the contents of the overturned trunk lay. "Damnable papers!" he growled low. "To think it is too late now to continue the search! Bah! By shutting the mouth of an informant! That's the way to settle it! The best way, too! Now for it!" Without apparent effort, the man in the hooded mask seized Elizabeth Dollon in his muscular arms. "Come, mademoiselle," he said in a jeering tone. "Come to bye-bye. Sleep better than on this sofa. You will sleep a longer sleep, that's certain." An evil smile punctuated these sinister remarks. He laid the poor girl's body on the floor in the middle of the room. Then, approaching a little gas stove, he detached the india rubber tube and slipped the end of it between his victim's teeth. He turned the gas tap. "Perfect," he said, as he straightened himself. "Tomorrow morning, early, at 8 o'clock or at 9, the excellent Madame Bourrat will open the meter. The narcotic this child has taken will prevent her from waking, so that, without suffering, without cries, quite gently, sweet Elizabeth will pass from life to death. But it will not do to linger here. Let us find Jules and give him the necessary instructions." The stranger went out into the corridor, closing the door. The thing had been well managed. The screws keeping the bolt case in position were put back in their holes. The key remained inside. No one would suspect that only a slight push was necessary to get into the room. With a chuckle, the stranger bent down and pushed a tassel under the door. The servant must not discover the trick when she is sweeping the passage. Now, with this wedge, the door cannot be opened without a violent push. With a last glance up and down the passage, illuminated for a moment by his electric torch, the stranger made sure that there was no one about to see him. Then, with silent tread, he began to go downstairs. Halfway down, his accomplice awaited him. "Well, master?" questioned Jules, in a low, trembling voice. In a calm, quiet voice, the man in the hood mask replied: "It is done, is successful. I have wedged the door to. You will be careful when you are sweeping tomorrow?" Jules lowered his head. "Yes, yes. Have you?" The stranger put his hand on the servant's shoulder. "Listen," whispered the stranger. "I do not repeat my orders 20 times over. Have I not already told you that I do not allow myself to be questioned? Try to remember that. You wish to know whether I have killed her. Well, I will tell you this. I have not killed her, but I have so managed things that she will kill herself. A suicide, you understand. One piece of advice. Tomorrow keep anyone from going to her room as long as you can. If Madame Bourrat or anyone else asks for her, you must say that you saw her leave the house, that she has gone out." "But," protested Jules, "it is impossible what you tell me to say, master. It just happens that she is expecting visitors tomorrow. She told me that on this account she meant to stay indoors all day." The man with the hood mask ground his teeth. "You idiot! What does that matter? You are to say, Mademoiselle Elizabeth has just gone out. But she told me that she was not going far, and that you should return in about 20 minutes. If anyone should ask for her again, you are to answer that she has not come in yet." "But, master, when they find out what's happened really?" "Oh,
When it is discovered, it will seem quite natural that a person who means to commit suicide, for she will have committed suicide, you understand, should have taken precautions not to be disturbed. You grasp this?"
"Yes, master, yes."
They had returned to the garden. The man in the hooded mask was preparing to get over the gate. "Farewell. Be faithful. Be intelligent. You know what you have to gain. You also know what risks you run. Eh? Now go."
"You will return to-morrow, master?"
The man with the hooded mask looked his accomplice up and down. "I shall return when it pleases me to do so." Then, with marvellous agility, without making a spring for it, with a quite extraordinary muscular flexibility and power, the stranger leaped on to the little wall, cleared the gate, and disappeared into the night. Jules, with bent head, much moved, terribly anxious, slowly walked back to the house. End of Chapter 12. Read by Don W. Jenkins. Rancho San Diego, California. shaggybark.blogspot.com.
Of Messengers of Evil by Marcel, Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 13. Rue Raffet. Marais, second reporter of La Capitale, shook hands with Fandor. "Are you in a good humour, dear boy?"
"So.
"Ah, well, here is something which will cheer you up, I'm sure. Here's a letter from a lady for you. I found it in my pigeonhole by mistake."
Fandor smiled. "From a lady? You must be mistaken. How do you know it is?"
"By the handwriting, the paper, and so on. I am not mistaken, am I ever?" Laughing, Marais threw down on Fandor's table a small envelope with a deep black border.
"Yes, it is a letter from a woman," said Fandor as he picked it up. "From whom? Ah, why, yes."
With a hasty finger he tore open the envelope whilst his colleague withdrew, making a joking remark. "Dear boy, I leave you to this tender missive. I should be annoyed with myself were I to interrupt your reflections." Fandor's friend would have been surprised if he could have seen the gloomy expression which the perusal of this so-called love letter produced. Jérôme had turned to the signature: Elizabeth Dollon. "What does she want with me?" he asked himself. "After the extraordinary affair of rue du Quatre Septembre, one must suppose that she has arrived at some conclusion regarding the possible guilt of her brother. So long as she does not let her imagination run away with her, and, like the police, fancy that Jacques Dollon is still in the land of the living. The position the poor thing is in is a very cruel one." Fandor had met Jacques Dollon's young sister repeatedly, and every time he had been more and more troubled by the poor girl's touching grief, as well as by her pathetic beauty, which had made a great impression on him. He began to read her letter. "Dear Sir, you have been so good to me in all my troubles, you have shown me such true sympathy, that I do not hesitate to ask your help once more. Such an extraordinary thing has happened to me which I cannot account for at all, which, nevertheless, makes me think more than ever that my poor brother is living, innocent, and kept prisoner, perhaps by those who compel him to accept the responsibility for all those horrible crimes you know about. To-day, whilst I was in Paris on business, some people, of whom I know nothing, I need hardly say, whom not a soul in the private boarding house where I am saw, these persons entered my room. I found all my belongings turned upside down, my papers scattered over the floor, every drawer and trunk and box ransacked from top to bottom. You can guess how frightened I was. I do not think they had come to do me any personal harm, not even to rob me, for I had left my modest jewellery on the mantelpiece and found them still there. Those who entered my room did not covet valuables. Then why did they come? You are perhaps going to say that my imagination is playing me tricks. Nevertheless, I assure you that I try to keep calm, but I cannot keep control of myself, and I am terribly afraid. I have just said that nothing was stolen from me. I think, however, it right to mention one strange coincidence. I was convinced that I had left, in a little red pocket book, the list I spoke to you of, which had been retrieved at my brother's house on the day of Madame de Vibray's death. It was, as I have told you, written in green ink by a person whose handwriting I do not know. I can hardly tell why, but amidst all the disorders in my room I immediately searched for this list. The little pocket book was on the floor amongst other papers, but the list was not to be found in it. Am I mistaken? Have I packed it in somewhere else? Or, allowing for the fact that everything has been turned upside down, has this paper slipped among other papers, which would explain why I had not come across it again? In spite of myself, I must confess to you that the thieves, I fancy, had only one aim in view when they entered my room, and that was to get hold of this list. What is your opinion? I feel that perhaps I am about to show myself both inconsiderate and injudicious, but you know how miserable I am, and you will understand how the position I am in gives me grounds for being distracted. I am bent on talking this over with you, on knowing what you think of it. Perhaps even, knowing how clever you are, you might be able to find something, an indication, some detail in my room. I have not touched anything. I shall stay indoors all to-morrow, in the hope of seeing you. Do come if you possibly can. It seems to me that I am forsaken by everyone, and I trust only you.
Jérôme Fandor read and re-read this letter, which had been written with a trembling hand. "Poor little soul," he murmured. "Here is something more to add to her troubles. It is really terrible. It seems to me as if we should never come to the end of it, and I ask myself whether the police will ever find the key to all these mysteries. Did someone really break into Elizabeth Dollon's room to steal this paper? It is rather improbable. Judging from what she told me, there is nothing compromising in it. But then, why this search? She is right so far. If the intruders had been merely thieves, they would have carried off her jewellery. Then it is for that paper they came? Besides, ordinary burglars would have had considerable difficulty in getting into her room, where she is remarkably well guarded, by the very fact of there being other boarders in the house. No, the very audacity of this attempted theft seems to prove that it is connected with the other affairs which have brought the name of Jacques Dollon into such prominence. I see in this the same extraordinary audacity, the same certainty of escape, the same long and careful preparation, for it is a by no means convenient place for a burglary in open day. Comings and goings are perpetual, and the guilty persons ran 100 risks of being caught."
Fandor interrupted his reflections to read Elizabeth's letter once more.
"She is dying of fright, that is evident. In any case, she calls to me for help. Her letter was posted yesterday evening. I will go and see her, and at once. Who knows but I might find some clue which would put me on the right track."
Jérôme Fandor did not feel very hopeful. After having gone carefully over every point connected with and pertaining to the affair of rue du Quatre Septembre, he had almost come to the conclusion, optimistic as he was regarding the police, that chance alone would bring about the arrest of the guilty parties.
"To lay these criminals by the heels," he had frankly declared, "requires the aid of very favourable circumstances, and without them, neither I nor the police will get at the truth of it all."
Fandor made a definite distinction between the opinion of the police and his own, because two different theories now obtained with regard to the two affairs: that of the attack on the Princess Sonia Danidoff, and that of the robbery of rue du Quatre Septembre, where the imprints of Jacques Dollon's fingers had been found. The police and Fandor coupled Monsieur Havard with Monsieur Bertillon under this definition. The police held it for certain that Jacques Dollon was alive, very much alive, and the probabilities were great that he was guilty of the different crimes attributed to him. In an interview granted to a press rival of La Capitale, Monsieur Bertillon had stated: "We base our assertion that Dollon is alive, and consequently guilty, on material facts. We have found his signature attached to each of the crimes, and it is a signature which cannot be imitated by anyone." For his part, Fandor held it as certain that Jacques was dead.
"I maintain that since 50 persons have seen Jacques Dollon dead, it is infinitely more likely that he is dead than that he is alive. The imprints of his fingers, his hand, are equally visible, it is true, and seem to prove that he is alive; but the conclusive nature of this test is nullified by the fact that, before the discovery of these imprints, before these imprints had been made, Jacques Dollon was dead."
And in his articles in La Capitale, Jérôme Fandor, with a persistency which finished by disconcerting even the most convinced partisans of the police contention, continued to maintain that Jacques Dollon was dead, dead as dead, and, to use his own expression, as dead as it was possible for anyone to be dead. Jérôme Fandor had just rung the bell at the garden gate of Madame Bourrat's private boarding house in Auteuil. Jules hastened to answer this ring, and was met by the question: "Is Mademoiselle Elizabeth Dollon at home?" "No, monsieur, she went out not an hour ago." "And you are certain she has not returned?" "Absolutely, monsieur. There are 2 visitors waiting for her already." "She will be in soon, then?" "Certainly, monsieur. She will not be long." Fandor looked at his watch. 10:15. Very well, I will wait for her." "If monsieur will kindly follow me?" Fandor was shown into the drawing room. He had advanced only a step or two when he was greeted with:
"Why, Monsieur Fandor!"
"I am delighted to see you," cried Fandor, shaking hands with Monsieur Barbey and Monsieur Nanteuil. Both gave him a pleasant smile of welcome. "You have come to see Mademoiselle Dollon, I suppose?"
"Yes, we have come to assure her that we will do all in our power to help her out of her terrible difficulties. She wrote to us a few days ago to ask if we would act as intermediaries regarding the sale of some of her unfortunate brother's productions. Also to see if we could get her a situation in some dressmaking establishment. We have come to assure her of our entire sympathy." "That is most kind of you. They told you, did they not, that she had gone out? I think she will not be absent long, for I have an appointment with her. But, if you will allow me, I will go to the office and ask if they have the least idea which way she has gone, for I have little time to spare, and if we could go to meet her, it would save at least a few minutes." Jérôme Fandor rose and went toward one of the drawing room doors. "You are making a mistake," said Monsieur Nanteuil. "The office is this way," and he pointed to another door.
"Bah! All roads lead to Rome." With that, Fandor went out by the door he had approached first. "They are nice fellows," said Fandor to himself. "If Elizabeth Dollon is really not in... But, is she really not in the house? I am by no means sure. If she feels timid at the idea of seeing the bankers, their visit may have made her nervous, considering the state she is in. She might have sent to say she was not at home in order to have time to add some finishing touches to her toilette." Fandor, who knew the house, mounted the little staircase leading to the first floor. Elizabeth's room was on this floor. Before her door he stopped and sniffed. "Queer smell," he murmured. "It smells like gas." He knocked boldly, calling: "Mademoiselle Elizabeth, it is I, Fandor." The smell of gas became more pronounced as he waited. A horrible idea, an agonising fear, flashed through his mind. He knocked as hard as he could on the door. "Mademoiselle Elizabeth! Mademoiselle Elizabeth!" No answer. He called down the stairs: "Waiter! Porter!" But apparently the one and only manservant the house boasted was occupied elsewhere, for no one answered. Fandor returned to the door of Elizabeth's room, knelt down and tried to look through the keyhole. The inside key was there, which seemed to confirm his agonising fear. "She has not gone out, then." He took a deep breath. "What a horrible smell of gas!" This time he did not hesitate. He rose, stepped back, sprang forward, and with a vigorous push from the shoulder, he drove the door off its hinges. "My God!" he shouted. In the centre of the room, Fandor had just seen Elizabeth Dollon lying unconscious. A tube, detached from a portable gas stove, was between her tightly closed lips. The tap was turned full on. He flung himself on his knees near the poor girl, pulled away the deadly tube, and put his ear to her heart. What joy, what happiness he felt when he heard, very feeble but quite unmistakable beatings of Elizabeth's heart. "She lives!" What unspeakable relief Jérôme Fandor felt! What thankfulness! The noise he had made, breaking the door off its hinges, brought the whole household running to the spot. As the manservant, followed by Madame Bourrat, followed in turn by Monsieur Barbey and Nanteuil, appeared in the doorway uttering cries of terror, Jérôme called out: "No one is to come in! It is an accident!" Then, lifting Elizabeth in his strong arms, he carried her out of the room. "What she needs is air!" He hurried downstairs and out into the garden with his precious burden, followed by the terrified witnesses of the scene.
"You have saved her life, monsieur!"
cried Madame Bourrat in a tragic voice. She groaned:
"Oh, what a scandal!"
"Yes, I have saved her," replied Fandor, as, panting with his exertions, he laid Elizabeth Dollon flat on a garden seat. "But from whom? It is certainly not attempted suicide. There is some mystery behind this business. It's a regular theatrical performance, arranged simply for effect, and to mislead us," declared Fandor. Then, turning to the bankers, he said courteously, but with an air of command: "Please lay information with the superintendent of police at once. The nearest police station, you understand. Madame," he said, addressing the overwhelmed Madame Bourrat, "you will be good enough to look after Mademoiselle Dollon, will you not? Take every care of her. There is not much to be done, however. I have seen many cases of commencing asphyxia. She will regain consciousness now in a few minutes." Then, looking at the manservant, he said in a sharp tone: "Come with me. You will mount guard at the door of Mademoiselle Elizabeth's room, whilst I try to discover some clues before the police arrive on the scene." To tell the truth, our young journalist felt embarrassed at the idea that Elizabeth Dollon was about to regain consciousness, and that he would have to submit to being thanked by her, when she knew who had saved her. Accompanied by the manservant, he went quickly upstairs and into Elizabeth's room. "You must not enter Mademoiselle Dollon's room on any account," said Fandor sternly. "It is quite enough that I should run the risk of effacing the, probably very slight, clues which the delinquents have left behind them." "But, monsieur, if the young lady put the tubing between her lips, it must have been because she wished to destroy herself." "On the face of it, you are right, good fellow. But when one is right, one is often wrong." Without more ado, Fandor started on a minute inspection of the room. Elizabeth had but stated the truth when she wrote that it had been thoroughly ransacked. Only her toilet things had been spared, but some books had been taken from their shelves and thrown about the floor, their pages crumpled and spoiled. He noticed the emptied trunk. Its contents, copy books, letters, pieces of music, had been roughly dealt with. On the mantelpiece, in full view, lay Elizabeth's jewellery, some rings and brooches, a small gold watch, a purse. "A very queer affair," murmured Fandor, who was kneeling in the middle of the room, rummaging, searching, and not finding any clue. He rose, carefully examined all the woodwork, but found nothing incriminating. He examined the lock of the unhinged door, which had subsided on the floor. The lock was intact, the bolt moved freely. The screws only of the staple had given way. "That," thought Fandor, "is probably owing to the force of my thrust." The window fastening was intact, the window closed. "If the robbers," reflected Fandor, "got into a closed room, they must have used false keys." Having examined the means of access to the room, Fandor started on a still more minute examination of the interior. He scrutinised the furniture and the slight powdering of dust on each article. In vain. Then the washstand had its turn. Nothing. He scrutinised the soap. "Ah, this is interesting!" he cried. The manservant had made himself scarce, and Fandor, unobserved, could wrap up the piece of soap in his handkerchief, and hide it in the lowest drawer of the chest of drawers, under a pile of linen. He was whistling now. "That bit of soap is interesting, very!" he cried. "Let the police come. I am not afraid of their blundering. Now to see how Elizabeth is getting on." When he reached her side, he found she had recovered full consciousness, and was preparing to answer the questions of a police superintendent, who, summoned by the bankers, had hastened to the scene of action. He was a stout, apoplectic man, very full of his own importance. "Come now, mademoiselle, tell us just how things happened from beginning to end. We ask nothing better than to believe you, but do not conceal any detail, not the slightest." Poor Elizabeth Dollon, when she heard this speech, stared at the pompous police official, astonished. What had she to conceal? What had she to gain by lying? What did he think, this fat policeman, who took it upon himself to issue orders, when he should rather have tried to comfort her? Nevertheless, she at once began telling him all that she knew with regard to the affair. She told him of her letter to Fandor, that her room had been visited the evening before, by whom she did not know, that she had not said a word about it to anyone, fearing vengeance would fall on her, frightened, not understanding what it all meant. Then she came to what the police dignitary called her suicide. As she finished her recital with a reference to her rescue by Fandor, she looked at the young journalist. It was a look of great gratitude and a kind of ardent tenderness, with a touch of fear in it.
"Strange, very strange," pronounced the superintendent of police, who had been taking notes with an air of great gravity. "So very strange, mademoiselle, that it is very difficult to credit your statements, very difficult indeed."
Whilst he was speaking, Fandor was saying to himself: "Decidedly it is that! Just what I was thinking! It is quite clear, clear as the sun in the sky, evident, indisputable!" And he refused, very politely of course, for one has to respect the authorities, to accompany the superintendent, who in his turn went upstairs to Elizabeth's room, in order to carry out the necessary legal verification. End of Chapter 13. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California, shaggybark.blogspot.com.